Welcome back. It is time now for the France 24 debate. And today we're turning our eye to the extreme weather conditions in Louisiana, where there are warnings of storm surges and flash floods in and around New Orleans. This in the wake of the now weakened Hurricane Ida. Well, the hurricane slammed into the Louisiana coast on Sunday, knocking out power for more than 1 million people, including the whole of New Orleans City. Well, Ida comes 16 years to the day after Hurricane Katrina devastated the same area. Well, the full extent of the damage and the number of victims is yet to be determined, but what is clear is that scientists have long been warning of a rise in cyclone activity because climate change is warming the oceans. But it's not just wetter weather around the world that we're seeing, it's also drier weather. At this very moment, there are around 90 wildfires blazing in the United States. And only this month, Europe recorded the hottest ever temperature. We also had wildfires tearing through the Mediterranean region. And then last month, there was severe rainfall and flooding, which killed scores of people in Germany and Belgium. So is the planet trying to tell us something? Is there a clear link between extreme weather and climate change? And despite measures from world governments, will things get worse before they get better? If indeed they do and can get better? Well, those are some of the questions I'll be putting to our panel of guests today. Those guests include here with me in the studio Clémence Dubois, who is the spokesperson for 350.org and an expert on environmental regulation. A warm welcome to you, Clémence. Just very briefly, tell us what is 350.org?
So 350 comes from 350 ppm, parts per million, and it's the safe limit of carbon in the atmosphere. And unfortunately, we've passed the 410 this year.
Okay. All right. Thank you for explaining that. Just give us a bit of context for our audience. We're also joined by Jean-Pascal Van Ipsel, who is a professor of climatology and environmental sciences at the Catholic University of Louvain. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Professor. Also joining us is physicist and climate expert Jean-François Bréant. Thank you so much to you. Plus, we're joined by
it's actually François-Marie Bréant.
Okay, François-Marie Bréant, thank you so much for correcting that for us. We're also joined by our correspondent Eric Pape, who is in Baton Rouge in Louisiana. Eric, let's begin with you. Just bring us up to speed. What is the latest on the ground there in the aftermath of the now weakened Hurricane Ida?
Well, the aftermath is sort of everything. We don't know how bad the storm actually was. We're still getting reports. Officially, there's one person dead, but the governor of the state of Louisiana has said that they expect far more to be discovered dead, and there are many threats. There's the threat of water surges, electricity is out, gas stations are out of power, telephone service is very spotty or mostly non-existent. This is an example in many ways of the climate putting a lot of pressure on people who are already feeling a great deal of pressure, since this is also a COVID hotspot, one of the hottest spots in the United States before this storm arrived. So there's a lot going on, a lot of pressure and a lot of tension.
Certainly looks like the winds have died down behind you. I mean, how ready was New Orleans? And I just want to ask you, given that this is 16 years to the day since Hurricane Katrina, which of course made international headlines and is still talked about to this day, what sort of lessons that were learned from Katrina perhaps made this latest severe weather system less damaging than it might otherwise have been?
Well, I think there's something important to remember about Katrina is that it didn't just come and hit in one fell swoop. It came in waves. I think people forget that a great deal. They thought for a time that things were getting better, and in fact they got worse. There were late storm surges. The damage from all of the water rolled out over time. So we're not in the clear by any means. The city of New Orleans is without electricity. And by some reports, it may not get electricity in many areas for up to 2 to 3 weeks, which would involve enormous safety and security risks and threats. People are being encouraged in some cases to leave the city, and that may accelerate. So a great deal was done. The levee system, I believe, received an injection of about $14 billion, and the Governor Edwards has said that it has held, at least at this point, that is the report we're getting, So that was a lesson. The other lesson, I think, is that these kinds of storms, they don't mimic each other. Each one is distinct. It puts different pressures on different parts of the sort of ecosystem of the state, the infrastructure of the state. So it takes a long time to know that you're in the clear. With all this power out, there are many potential safety risks. There are other risks. Gas from people's homes could start fires. There can be more storm surges. There's such a wide array of possibilities. We just don't know yet. Just because the storm has stopped and the wind has cut down in this part of the state and most of the storm has moved far north, it doesn't mean we're in the clear yet.
And just lastly, I mean, Louisiana is an extremely conservative state, and I'm just wondering whether issues like the issue we're discussing in the debate today, climate change, is that something that people accept as being a reality now, or is it something that you think a number of people, a majority perhaps of people, are still in denial about?
It's hard to know the exact number who are in denial. I think people understand that there's a lot of extreme weather here, whether they attribute that to climate change and forces created by human beings or not. That's a big matter of debate in a state like this. And you're going to find people on both sides of the issue, probably more people here than in most places who do not believe in climate change. But people do understand extreme weather, and they're familiar with it, and they do understand that there is more of it now than there has been maybe a generation or two ago. I think that's pretty apparent, and people in this moment want to get through this and maybe not think about the bigger picture. Later on, people who believe in climate change will be glad to talk about that to try to bring about change, and people who are skeptical of it may not want to have that conversation in the future either.
Okay, well, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed. Our correspondent, Eric Pape, in Baton Rouge in Louisiana. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's kick off the debate, and let me start by putting my first question to you, Clémence, since you're here with us in the studio. People will be looking at what happened there in Louisiana and saying it's nothing new. The area is familiar with extreme weather events. How can we be sure that this wouldn't have happened anyway, and that this actually is in some way connected to climate change, which in turn is caused by humans?
You know, I'm sure the scientists that you invited here today will tell you that as well. But of course, there have always been hurricanes, floods, or fires. But it's just the frequency and the intensity of it is now becoming almost... it's not under control. We've seen this summer that people have been paying the price of inaction, decades of inactions, because scientists were ringing the bell already from the 70s or the 80s. So what we're seeing here, again, with this hurricane, is that we have delayed action far too long, and that now people are paying the price of this inaction, and but some companies are still making profit out of it. And of course, I'm thinking about the fossil fuel industry, for instance. So there is a common demand across the climate movement is that we stop calling those hurricanes Ida or Idai, but we can call them ExxonMobil instead, for instance, because nobody is named Ida has been warming the oceans like ExxonMobil did for decades.
Okay, so we may see the name of gas companies being attributed to those extreme weather events in the future.
Just to bring the light that those events are not natural, they are man-made, and they are actually made by culprits that we can identify now, such as the fossil fuel industry.
Thanks for that opening remark. Thank you so much. Let me turn to you, Professor Jean-Pascal Van Ypersel. Do you agree with that? Are we seeing more extreme weather events in the world, or is it just that we have more ability to report on them and more information across the globe is exchanging hands?
Well, we certainly have more ability to observe. We have satellites, etc., for about the last 40 years. But, you know, the latest IPCC report published just a few weeks ago was very clear that over those 4 decades, just to talk about tropical cyclones, for example, the proportion of major tropical cyclones, the most intense, those of category 3 to 5, and this one we just hit Louisiana was category 4, I believe. has increased over the last 4 decades, the periods for which we have very good satellite observation. So that the trend is clear. It's not a trend in the total number of tropical cyclones, but it's a trend as far as tropical cyclones is concerned, is of the proportion of those who are very intense. And of course, it's those who make the most damage. And that can be explained by the physics of the atmosphere and the ocean. With the warmer oceans, there is more energy available for those tropical cyclones to have very extreme winds and also very intense precipitation, huge quantities of precipitation. And then when on top of that you have a sea level that has increased because of the warming as well by several dozens of centimeters, it means that the starting point of the wave, the storm surge that is caused by a tropical cyclone when it approaches land, the starting point is higher. So that also participates to the increasing damage from that kind of phenomena, which clearly intensified by climate change. And climate change is indeed caused by the burning of fossil fuel and by deforestation.
Okay, thank you for that. And last but not least, François-Marie Brion, do you agree with that? And my question to you is there a clear link between extreme weather and climate change?
I certainly agree with everything that has just been said. And actually, I was preparing myself to say a few things, but they all have been said by Professor before me. Maybe the only thing that I would like to add is that there's nothing that you can say with just one event, like the one cyclone that just hit Louisiana. What you can say really is the increasing number of high intensity cyclones. And so you have to be extremely careful before saying, oh, this one event is the result of climate change. No, you cannot say that because we have had a very strong cyclone in the past. And so you should not say that about just one cyclone. You can say that you have a manifestation of climate change when you see an increasing fraction of the high intensity cyclone, and also perhaps an increase of the damage that are due both to the increased precipitation because there is more water in the atmosphere, and also because of the increasing sea level, as has just been said.
And just with regards, let me stay with you, François-Marie Brion, because historical records don't go back that far. So when we want to make points of comparison, we've only really got from the present day to the mid to late 19th century, perhaps, as a point of comparison. That's not very much. So how are assumptions made when we do these simulations? What sort of data is used, and what's the methodology?
Well, there are two things. I mean, first, you have a record that is more than 100 years, and therefore you can say something about the change in the frequency of those intensity, and also you have a climate modeling. You know that the physicists have developed models, and those models tell you that indeed, if you have a warming atmosphere and ocean warming, you should expect that kind of event. So you understand what's going on, really. And so this is what we call attribution. You know, there are some change in the climate that you can that may be due to natural variability. But in that particular case, the increasing number of high-intensity cyclones, we understand what is going on. We understand why there is an increasing number of those cyclones. So you can really attribute this signal, this climate signal, to the global warming and therefore to the increase of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And it's really because we understand what's going on.
Okay, and Clémence, let me ask you. I mean, what we've basically been saying up until this point is that Hurricane Ida probably would have happened anyway, but it might not have been as severe and as intense as it was. Does that roughly summarize things as far as you're concerned?
Yes, roughly. And of course, the scale of the devastation is always harder and harder. And the IPCC report, so this is making scientific consensus, and it has been released amidst a global onslaught of devastating wildfires, floods, drought, famine, and ecosystem damage. So all in all together, this summer, the Earth has been burning, and so there is nothing natural in it. And I would like to come back to what you've asked, whether people are concerned or are tying the dots between extreme weather events and climate change. And there have been a lot of polls showing that actually, at least in Europe, it's the main concern of people, climate change as a threat. And so I think it's important to state that it's not the people who are in denial, because we all feel deep inside that it's part of our life and our future. It's not a future threat. But the worst denial is the one from politicians or from bankers who are as well aware of the cause and consequences of climate change and are just preserving the status quo instead of changing and implementing the radical change we need to see so that it doesn't get worse. Because that's really the question we're facing now. How bad will we let it get? And the scientists are showing us different ways, different paths. Some of them are, one of them is actually to keep the climate crisis sort of under control, because of course there will still be climate change in the world and that will be devastating anyway. And some of them are making the entire Earth unlivable. And the IPCC report may be full of climate model, and of course, as citizens, we may feel far away from those conclusions. But actually, it's really easy to understand. You know, the main conclusion is like when you find yourself in a hole, you just stop digging if you want to get out of it. And I will just end by saying the words of the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres after the report. He said, and so he's supposed to be the one with the main concern for the entire Earth. And he said, this report must sound a death knell for coal and fossil fuels before they destroy our planet. There must be no new coal plants built after 2021. Countries should also end all new fossil fuel exploration and production and shift fossil fuel subsidies into renewable energies. So we should stop focusing just on the consequences and focus as well on the causes and how to tackle it.
Okay, you've had the last word in the first half. Thank you for that, Clémence Dubois. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. Stay with us. Welcome back to part two of the France 24 debate. Well, today we're looking at the number of severe weather events across the world, in particular in Louisiana, where we've been tracking the now weakened Hurricane Ida. Well, this severe weather event is by no means a one-off. And today we're asking our panel of experts, is there a clear link between extreme weather and climate change? Well, before we continue that discussion, let's get a summary of what's been happening in Louisiana these last 24 hours. France 24's Olivier Salazar-Winspear has this report for us.
Downing electricity poles, uprooting trees and making rubble out of historical buildings. This was the aftermath of Hurricane Ida in New Orleans on Monday morning. 16 years after Hurricane Katrina hit the same region with deadly consequences, that tragic anniversary was on many people's minds.
Not nowhere near like Katrina. But it could have been if it would have hit here. I think it hit Houma instead, Houma, Louisiana.
With winds topping more than 150 miles an hour, Ida has left a trail of destruction. Losing some momentum since it hit land, it's now a tropical storm and is pushing northeast into Mississippi and Alabama. On Sunday evening, the hurricane knocked out power across New Orleans, leaving more than 1 million residents in the dark. Some tried to seal their homes, hoping to remain safe inside. Others fled high-risk areas in search of shelter.
And we just want to get out and keep the kids safe and make sure that everybody's okay.
Heavy rainfall has also raised water levels in Alabama. There, aerial rescue teams were poised to take action as soon as weather conditions allowed them to take off. Authorities are also monitoring the health institutions in affected areas. Thousands of COVID patients are still hospitalized, and many could not be evacuated because there was no safe alternative where they could be housed.
Okay, so lots for us to discuss in the second half of the France 24 debate. Just to remind you, here in the studio is Clémence Dubois, a spokesperson for 350.org, as well as an expert on environmental regulation. Welcome to you again. We're also joined by Jean-Pascal Van Ypersel, who is a professor of climatology and environmental sciences at the Catholic University of Louvain. And we're also joined, last but not least, by physicist and climate expert François-Marie Bréant. Let me begin with you, François-Marie. In fact, we were just talking before the break about how the message about urgent action doesn't seem to be getting across. Do you agree with that? And why is it that that message, that action must be taken, doesn't seem to be getting across?
Well, the main reason is that fossil fuel is great. It allows you to travel very easily to all places in the world. It allows you to travel easily in France. It allows you to build a new object. It allows you to have a large house that is well heated. So everybody loves fossil fuel. This is the main reason why it's difficult to fight against those CO2 emissions, is that we need it in some way. And limiting, and we know that there is a need to decrease our emission by 50% before 2030 or something like that, and that will be difficult because we need this petrol, we need this fossil gas, and so on. And so this is one thing that I could not fully agree with Clémence Dubois a few minutes ago when she was saying that all that was because of bankers and the fossil fuel industry. It's because of all of us. I mean, we all use these fossil fuels, and we all have an impact on the planet. So I don't like this idea that to claim that it's because of the other. It's really because of all of us.
Okay, Clémence, let me put that to you. We shouldn't be blaming any one group. We shouldn't be blaming any one category of human being. It's everybody's fault. How do you respond?
No, I definitely disagree with that statement, because we definitely don't have the same responsibility. For instance, when I'm highlighting the responsibility of the fossil fuel industry, one might be aware that they've been spreading climate denialism since the 70s. So they've been actually countering the reports from scientists by channeling billions into fake informations, and we're paying now the consequences. And when I'm talking about the bankers, I can further my idea by saying that the problem is now, instead of investing in the solutions, so renewable energies or innovation into the energy system, we keep on funding the problem, which is scientifically unanimously recognized. So this is the oil, gas, and coal. So it's not our responsibility as people, especially because, those who are paying the biggest price of climate change in the consequences, so I'm thinking about people in East Asia, people in Africa, are those who have the less contributed to the problem. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, like, the fossil fuel industry nowadays is still blocking the solutions. They are doing massive advertising around greenwashed solutions. So, for instance, they are pushing forward the fact that we supposedly need natural gas, which is actually fossil gas, while actually we really have no room in our carbon budget for this energy. So instead of implementing the solutions we know we already have, we're still dragged into the 70s, into the 80s. And then the last point I want to answer is about sorry, I forgot.
François-Méry Bréant.
Yes, just said that everybody loves fossil fuels, but we have to remind ourselves that our society is indeed locked into fossil fuels. So if you want to live your life sustainably, you have little choices, especially in our society in the rich countries. And this is why, as individuals, the best thing we can do to tackle climate change is to act collectively, to dismantle the power of the fossil fuel industry, hold our politicians accountable, instead of minding about our own carbon budget, because that will definitely not be enough. And I think that when I see the kids in the streets who are calling for another global climate strike on the 24th of September, I don't see I love fossil fuels. I see fossil fuels and we want a future. And I think they're rather calling for a future with slightly less, but more for everyone, rather than just summer heat waves, floods, and hurricanes.
Let's turn back to Professor Jean-Pascal van Iepersele, who's been keeping very quiet. What are your thoughts? Where should the finger of blame be pointed, and why isn't the message getting across that urgent action needs to be taken?
I think it's actually not so productive to spend much time about who to blame. I mean, I think it's important to realize that the IPCC produces not only a report about climate science, which is a report published 3 weeks ago, but has also reports about solutions. And those reports are full of possibilities that are just ready to be implemented and on the table of decision makers and policymakers and citizens to a certain extent to be used. And it is possible to reduce emissions of coming from the burning of fossil fuel and coming from deforestation very significantly, much faster than what we have done now. And that is what is needed now.
But if false narratives are doing the rounds, and as our guest was just saying, perhaps PR companies have been working on behalf of fossil fuel companies over the years, and therefore posing a major setback to the whole process of educating the general public, and then those people go and vote for world leaders that then say that climate change is a hoax because that's what they think the general public that voted for them wants to hear. We've got this vicious circle, and it's got to be broken at some point, because if it isn't, then we're going to find ourselves in even more trouble, surely.
Absolutely. I mean, it's absolutely right that there are millions and millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars every year that are made available by the fossil fuel lobbies for climate disinformation. And so we are fighting an uphill battle, but let's fight it, and let's put the solutions on the table, and let's explain that what's really at stake is the inhabitability of the planet. I mean, certain parts of the planet are really at risk of becoming uninhabitable in the coming decades if we don't reduce emissions seriously. So this is really very, very important. So knowing that we have the possibility to, for example, have houses and apartments which are much more energy efficient than now, and knowing that to transform the building stock that we have into an efficient building stock, just to take that example, is also a fantastic opportunity for jobs and activities which make sense. Why don't we do it much more? I mean, it's possible. Yes, we can, as Barack Obama said. And if you read the IPCC report dealing with the solution space, indeed, it's there. It's possible.
Indeed, and I mean, I think what's perhaps something I'd like to put to François-Marie Bréant is, with regards to the messaging behind all of this, there's a lot of doom and gloom, but there's also this huge opportunity that we were just hearing about there, the green economy and all the jobs and job creation and the economic stimulus that segment represents. Why aren't we hearing more about that and perhaps a bit more carrot and a bit less stick?
Well, I certainly agree that the transformation of our society offers a lot of opportunities, and that there will be many jobs that will be created thanks to that. But you must also accept that there will be many jobs that will be destroyed. I mean, the whole air transportation industry should be closed by 2030. And are we ready for that? Okay, so there are opportunities, but there are also some threat for many people, and that's really the question. And if I was at the government today, would I be ready to say, okay, the air transportation industry should now close down? That's really the question. And to come back to the question whether there is a need for better education, I must say that in my colleagues, and I, we have known about the threat of climate change for more than 30 years, yet a very small fraction has decided to stop traveling because of that. And we should do that. We have all the knowledge to stop doing intercontinental travel. And we have had that knowledge for 30 years, but we have not done so.
Absolutely. There's huge hypocrisy. You're absolutely right to point that out. And just before I go to you, Clémence, I mean, just thinking about the COP26, which is going to be held in Glasgow in November, I mean, a lot of people who are observing that event, viewers on TV and people who read about it in the newspapers will say, how did all of those world leaders get to Glasgow? Well, of course, they went in private jets and on fossil-fueled aeroplanes to get there. So a degree of hypocrisy. You wanted to say something, Clémence?
No, I think it's indeed really crucial to say that there is a better path for us, and that we are fighting again for a better collective future, which is at hand. And so I really agree when I hear that there are all the solutions and that they are just they just need to be scaled up. And in terms of jobs, for instance, so the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development has issued a report that says that if you take just a third of what governments are currently using to subsidize coal, oil and gas, and invest that instead into clean industrialization, we could create hundreds of millions of jobs that will be sustainable and contribute to make the world a place we want to and we can live in. So I think indeed, when we see all the catastrophes, such as this hurricane, or last year were the fires, for instance, in Australia, which were really striking for a large part of the audience. We tend to ask ourselves, is it too late? Where is the hope? And actually, hope is not something that will fall on us, but it's something that we can create. And for instance, I have hope when I see people turning their despair into anger and their anger into action, and especially into collective action. And if you look around you, you will see thousands of entrepreneurs creating solutions, people building solidarity, fighting against the sources of pollution near their house, building campaigns that will shift away the flows of monies from the problem to the solutions. So there is hope, the hope we're making.
Absolutely. I mean, and the experts in this field seem to believe that a peak in greenhouse gas emissions will be reached by 2050, and that'll be followed by a slow decrease. So let me go back to you, Professor Jean-Pascal Van Ypersel. Do you think 2050 is too late? And let's talk a bit more about the solutions that are out there, because no one's suggesting that we should go live in a house lit by candles and have no electricity. We do have solutions. We can have renewable energy powering our house. In fact, that's an option in most cities across the world. You can say where you want your energy to come from. You can drive in a car that's been charged up on a battery, which is charged by renewable energy. There are solutions, aren't there?
Absolutely. Just first to come back on your question on 2050, where does it come from? It comes actually, again, from the IPCC, which was asked by COP21, a previous COP, the COP that agreed on the Paris Agreement, to produce a report about whether it was a good idea to shoot for no more than 2 degrees above the pre-industrial states at the global scale, or whether it would be better to shoot for no more than 1.5 degrees C above the pre-industrial temperature. And the answer came with the report published just 3 years ago, that indeed, from an ecological point of view and from a health point of view, and even from an economical point of view, as far as the impacts are concerned, it would be much better to stay under 1.5 degrees C temperature warming than to be above, for example, around 2 degrees. But then it also answered the questions, what do we need to do in terms of global emissions to stay under 1.5 degrees C? And the answer was, well, if humanity doesn't want to go above 1.5 degrees C, we need to have global CO2 emissions that are not larger than what the natural capacity to absorb in the ocean, in the forest, and in the soils can do to absorb our emissions. It's called carbon neutrality. So you don't emit more than what natural systems can absorb, and you need to reach that state no later than around 2050. So that's where that 2050 comes from. And this is really the objective most countries are now starting to have, is to be carbon neutral by 2050. And it's a huge challenge. But as I mentioned earlier, it's possible if all the solutions that have been explored in the IPCC reports are implemented at scale. And if indeed we stop using so much money, as Clémence has said, to subsidize fossil fuel, which is really a shame. I mean, how can we still use hundreds of billions of dollars or euros every year to subsidize usage of coal, oil, and gas, which are actually destroying or actually making our climate much less livable than it was. It's a shame.
We're running short of time. Let me turn to François-Marie Bréant. We're running very short of time, so you may very well have the last word. Can I just ask for your comments on what's been said up until this point?
No, I certainly agree with what has been said, and let me insist on the fact that the limiting climate change to 1.5 or 2 degrees, that would be extremely difficult, and we cannot exclude any solution. And I've heard a lot about renewable energy, and I think that we should also think about nuclear, because nuclear is also part of the solution, not only renewable energy.
Okay, go ahead.
And also energy efficiency. I mean, we need to stop wasting so much energy as well. I mean,
okay.
I fully agree.
As well.
Okay, just let me, since you're here with us in the studio, Clémence, let me give you the last word. I mean, people what should be thinking about COP26. That's the next thing we've got to look forward to. It's in November. Limiting global temperature rises to 1.5 degrees centigrade. But that was the same goal that was announced in Paris at the Paris summit 6 years ago. Not a lot of progress.
This is why we need to hold our leaders accountable, and that's a daily work. So my final word would be to look for a collective NGOs and to organize collectively to put the pressure and shift the trillions, invest in the solution rather than the problem, and kick the polluters out of the negotiation table.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. You've had the last word. Clémence Dubois, spokesperson for 350.org. Thank you very much indeed to you. Thank you also to Jean-Pascal Van Ypersel, a professor of climatology and environmental sciences at the Catholic University of Louvain. And thank you as well to François-Marie Bréant, a physicist and climate expert. And apologies again for getting your name wrong at the beginning. Thank you very much indeed to all of you. That was the France 24 debate.